Welcome back to Let's Make a Game, a channel about making computer role-playing games using the free program Twine and the Sugarcube format for Twine. In this video, I would like to continue my series on adapting the board game Source of the Nile, and in particular, I would like to talk about points for mapping terrain. In the previous video, we talked about points for mapping water features. So if there is a river, you get points, and if there is a lake, you get points. But you also get points in the original game for each hex of terrain, each new area that you uncover, with the points depending on your specialty and the terrain. So I have the beginning of a game here, and it's telling me that we're going to be moving through forested hills and that there'll be a river as usual. And I know that I have set it up so that you get 4 points per mile of forested hills that you map once you get 5 miles inland. And I know that you get 1 point per mile of river that you map. So in other words, once we get 5 miles inland, we should get 5 points. And then every mile after that, we should get another 5 points. I know that I could bring a doctor or a missionary, and they would generate an extra point per mile along the river, presumably because they're interested in good places to set up a mission or a hospital. But for simplicity's sake, I'm not going to do that. I'll take no specialists. So we'll just set up the expedition, and we'll make sure that the points are generating as they should be. And then I will discuss how I made the decision about what... I won't spend all the money. I'll make the decision... I'll talk about how I made the decisions of converting the points schedule in the board game to this adaptation, because it's not a strict adaptation, because the way that specialists work is different in our game. And then I'll quickly show you the code. The code is very straightforward. The main activity was deciding what to do and sort of working out where to put the code. So let's set out again. Once we hit 5 miles, we should get 5 points per mile. So 5 miles inland, we come across a group of warriors. And we know that we get 10 points for a group of warriors, or for discovering a tribe, actually. But you discover them by coming across a group of warriors. So we get 10 points for that. We'd get more if we had an anthropologist with us, but we don't. So that accounts for the 15 of our victory points that we can see. And so that leaves 5 victory points to account for. And well, because we're 5 miles inland, we should have got one lot of 5 points. So in other words, the points are working as they should. So as I say, I won't resolve that encounter today. I'll just go through how I made the decision of how much points you get and what those decisions were, and then I'll quickly show you the code. So I have here a set of charts from the original game, and you will remember that in the original game, you choose one of a set of specialties to be your player character. You can be an ethnologist, journalist, what is D? Doctor, missionary, EX is explorer, zoologist, biologist, or geologist. In my adaptation, your player character is always an explorer, but then they can choose to bring one or more specialists. They don't have to. I didn't in this example, but they can choose to bring one or more specialists, and that will, among other things, that will affect the points that you get. So I had to decide, how are we going to work out the points? Are we going to add them? So if let's say I'm an explorer and I bring a doctor and a missionary. Well, this schedule of points says that for mapping jungle, for each space of jungle, the doctor gets 1 point, the missionary gets 1 point, and the explorer gets 2 points. does that mean we get 4 points in total for mapping a jungle? Well, I decided no, because I feared that might make it you might get too many points. Instead, you would just get the best points. So in this case, you just get the 2 points. So if the explorer is among those that get the best points for a given terrain, then that terrain is very simple. So for mapping jungle, the explorer gets 2 points, so that's quite easy. We just say it's 2 points, because there's always going to be an explorer, because if the explorer dies, that's you dying, that's the player character dying, and the game is immediately over. So for jungle, it's simple, it's 2 points. For mountain, he's one of the ones that gets 2 points. So, well, mostly he. There were some female explorers, but the majority of them were men in the historical version of this. So the explorer is one of the ones that gets 2 points for mountains, so that's straightforward. And the same with swamp. It gets a little more complicated when we have velds, which is what we're calling plains, but you can see that for that, everyone gets 1 point except for the zoologist, who gets 2 points. I assume the in-game justification is that there's all these animals on the plain, and the zoologist is sort of sketching them and taking notes, and they can kind of make useful observations that will bring fame to the expedition. So what we do in this case is we say, if a zoologist is present, then plains are worth 2 points per mile, and otherwise they're worth 1. The same is true of desert. We see that a biologist and a geologist get 2 points and everyone else gets 1. So we say if a biologist or a geologist is present, then desert is worth 2 points. And if not, it's worth 1. The other complication was that the original game has combined terrain. So the terrain that we were going through was called forested hills. That's what we've called it in our version. In the original, it's jungle/mountains. So it's considered to be both a jungle space and a mountain space. And so what do you do there? Do you give the best points for jungle or mountain, or do you give both the points? Well, for now, I wasn't sure, and the rules don't seem to directly answer that question. I may have missed it. They're fairly long rules, and I may have missed where it's written, but I couldn't find it anyway. But I guessed that the intention was that you're meant to get points for both. So jungle/mountain, which is what we would call forested hills, because the explorer gets 2 points for each, I decided, okay, well that's just 4 points per mile. Two for it being jungle and 2 for it being mountain. I am going to chase that up with people who play the original board game and see how they do it, but that's how I'm doing it for now. So having made the decision about how many points to give for each type of terrain, let's get into the code and I'll show you what I did to make it happen. So we have this victory points page here, which is just a page of notes for myself or anyone who looks at the code at a later date. And so I went in here and I just wrote the decision. So I said desert, if a botanist or geologist is present, 2 points, otherwise 1 point. Hills, marsh and forest are all 2 points per mile, and so on. Plains get you 2 points with a zoologist and 1 point otherwise, etc., etc. And then, having done that, so that I remember it, we have to code it. And where do you code the code for getting points for mapping new terrain? Well, it's where you generate new terrain. And that is in the move page, and specifically within this, if $I plus $DI is over $FI. That is the area of the game where you're moving into new territory, and therefore you generate new territory. You only get the points once. Now you could argue that if you went through a place twice, the zoologist, for example, if you're going through plains, if you spend twice as much time there, the zoologist might be able to make twice as many observations and therefore get twice as many points. But that's not what the game seems to be saying. Instead, they're saying no, you only get the points once. I guess to encourage you to discover new places and take risks and go into new areas, because that's what the game is about. It's about exploration. So this is all code that we've discussed before. It's about generating the terrain, i.e. deciding what the terrain is going to be. And at last we get to this note that says points. And then another note to myself that says you only get points for terrain if you're at least 5 miles inland. The justification being that the people in the city have sort of mapped a little bit. They have a bit of an idea of what's immediately outside the city. And so we go if $I plus $DI is over 4. Now $I is how far inland you are. $DI is where you're going. So for example, if $I is 4 and $DI is 1, then that's going to be over 4. That will be when that will mean that you're 4 miles inland, heading inland, because that's what DI equal to 1 means. DI is 1 if you're heading inland and -1 if you're heading back. And that's where the new terrain is being generated. So if that's the case, firstly, we do this bit of code that I've used this particular bit of code quite a lot. $TN, square bracket, $TE, square bracket 1, n square bracket, $I plus $DI, n square bracket, n square bracket. So what does that mean? Well, $TE is the array which has a numeric value for the terrain with 1. So $TE 1x is a number saying whether it's desert or jungle or forest. Well, not jungle or forest because they're the same thing. Whether it's desert or forest or plains or whatever, X miles inland. $TE 2x is whether there's a river or a lake or neither, X miles inland. But for now, because we're dealing with the terrain itself, not whether a river is present, for now we're only interested in 1x. And the x we're interested in is, of course, $I plus $DI, because that's where you're going to be next. And instead of using $TE 1 $I plus DI directly, we'd use TN square bracket and then that code n square bracket. TN is an array that has the names of the different types of terrain. So $TN5 is the name of the type of terrain that's represented when $TE1x, let's say, is equal to 5. So why do we use $TN instead of $TE? Because it's more plain. I can say if Z is equal to desert, and it's obvious to anyone who's looking that I'm talking about what happens in desert spaces. Whereas if I didn't do that, if I used just TE directly, if I set Z equal to just this bit in here, then it'd have to be something like if Z is equal to 2. And there's no obvious way of telling what terrain that is referring to. You could, of course, go to initialize, look up TN, look up the second slot and see, that's plains or whatever. But this is much more straightforward. So if Z is equal to desert, for example, and then I've got a note to myself, if botanist or geologist is present, 2 points, otherwise 1 point. How do we tell if there's a botanist or a geologist present? Well, that's the $P array. All the different types of specialists have a slot in the $P array, and that slot is equal to 1 if that specialist is present, and 0 if they're not. There's never more than one of them. It's only ever, you can only ever take one. So $P is a botanist, I think, and $P1 is a botanist and $P4 is a geologist. So if either of those people are present, then we set VP equals VP plus 2, and otherwise we just set VP plus plus, which is to say add 1 to it. And then plains is basically the same, 2 points if a zoologist is present, otherwise 1 point. Forested hills and swamp are very straightforward. They're always 4 points. And then hills, marsh and forest are always 2 points. And I've done what I often do in code, where if I've done the code correctly, it should never get to this else, because these should cover all of the possible options. Desert, plains, forested hills, swamp, hills, marsh, forest. That should be all of the possibilities. But just in case I've made an error, perhaps I've misspelt something or something like that, or misremembered how I thought it was hills with forests and it's forested hills or something like that. Well, I've got this failsafe where it'll give me an error message and tell me that I've made a mistake, but I haven't, and so that will never come up. It's just a failsafe for me. And so that's how that works. That's how you get points for terrain. I have to say, I don't know if it's a bit too elaborate. I don't know if I wouldn't rather just have a set number for how far you explored inland. Maybe this, but of course I'm worried if I do that, the game is set up to give bonus points to particular specialties, and if I flatten it, if I just say you get a certain amount of points for how many miles you explore, that'll disadvantage those specialties, and it'll make those specialties less different to each other. So, yeah, I don't know. But I am kind of thinking that it feels a bit weird that you could have, sometimes you get 20 points and sometimes you get 10 points. And yeah, there's a reason for it. There's a reason because you're in a different terrain and you've got different specialists, but it sort of feels like it feels a bit random. It's not exactly random because it's based on what specialist you have and what terrain there is, but it sort of feels a bit random. It feels like points should come about as a result of decisions you've made. But anyway, or for danger. I'm okay with giving people points for meeting locals because that's always an occasion of danger. So if you get out of it, well, you've done something, you've made some sort of good decision, or you've been lucky, and therefore, yeah, maybe you should get points. But anyway, that's how it is in the original game, and that's what I've just done it as much as possible the same way that the original game does it for now. So that is all I'm going to do with victory points for the moment. There are more things that give you victory points, but I have to code those other situations before I can sort of add to the victory points, if that makes sense. So I've added victory points for everything that sort of we've done so far. So what I'm probably going to do next is either what happens when you're taken prisoner, or what happens when the natives are neutral, i.e. when you have to deal with a tribe that hasn't immediately attacked you. So for now, I hope that was useful or interesting to at least some of you, and I hope you will tune in next time.